Hello guys, welcome to Phoenix What If. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto ate a god-tier devil fruit and fell in love with Nico Robin? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Eye of the Storm. The rain did not fall. It was driven, a horizontal torrent of water and mud that lashed across a landscape of shattered rock and forgotten dead. For the thousands of shinobi huddled behind crumbling Earth-style walls, the world had been reduced to the shriek of the wind and the oppressive darkness of a sky that had forgotten the sun. This was no natural storm. It was a cage of roaring wind and churning black clouds. And at its heart stood a single man. Uzumaki Naruto stood on the Gedo statue's head, one of the 10 massive horns his perch. The wind, which tore banners from their poles and ripped trees from the earth, did not touch him. It flowed around him, a deferential river parting for a sacred stone. His coat, a deep yellow reminiscent of a forgotten Hokage, was tattered at the edges but hung with an impossible stillness. Golden lightning, purer and brighter than any jutsu, crackled across his shoulders and danced in the space between his fingers. He was 20 years old, and his eyes, a blue so deep they seemed to have swallowed the sky, held the weary calm of a god who had seen too much of man. Below him, Madara Uchiha stood with his arms crossed, his resurrected body unbothered by the gale. The legendary shinobi, the ghost of the Uchiha, looked up not with the arrogance of a victor, but with the strained curiosity of a master craftsman examining a tool that had suddenly, inexplicably, changed its function. You always had potential, boy, Madara's voice cut through the gale, amplified by chakra. To think this is what they cast out. Konoha's foolishness truly knows no bounds. Naruto's gaze drifted past him, over the terrified ranks of the allied shinobi forces. He saw them all. The Raikage, his powerful frame tense, staring at the sky as if it had personally betrayed him. Onoki, the Tsuchikage, kept afloat on a shaking platform of rock, his old face a mask of disbelief. Gaara, standing on a wave of sand, his expression unreadable but his stillness a testament to the shock that held them all paralyzed. He saw Tsunade, her medical ninjutsu keeping her standing, her face pale. She was not looking at him, but at the monstrous statue he stood upon. They were all insects in a jar, and he was the one shaking it. This was never about Konoha, Naruto said, his voice quiet yet carried on the wind to every corner of the battlefield. There was no anger in it, no lingering resentment. Only a profound finality. He had wept for his village long ago. He had bled for it. He had begged for its acceptance. They had answered by putting Danzo's chains on him. He had answered by breaking them. And the world with them. Madara laughed, a dry, rasping sound. No, is it not about the village that scorned you? The friends who watched as you were labeled a threat to be sealed? Do not lie to me. I know the taste of betrayal. It is the fuel of all great power. You think power comes from hatred. Naruto flexed his hand, and a bolt of lightning the size of a great tree arced from the sky, striking the ground a mere foot from Madara's position. It did not explode. It simply pierced the earth, leaving a smoldering, glass-lined tunnel that seemed to descend into the planet's core. Madara did not flinch, but a flicker of something, annoyance, perhaps caution, crossed his face. Power is the ability to make the world as it should be, Naruto continued, his eyes finally locking onto Madara's Rinnegan. Your mistake is thinking you're the one who gets to decide. Madara's patience finally snapped. I have indulged you long enough, Stray Jinchuriki. You are an anomaly, a storm that needs to be broken. He inhaled, his chest swelling as he gathered an immense amount of chakra. Great fire annihilation. A sea of incandescent flame erupted from his mouth. A rolling tsunami of fire so vast it blotted out what little light remained. It was a jutsu meant to incinerate entire armies, to turn forests to ash. It washed over the Gedo statue, a wave of absolute destruction. The allied forces cried out in despair. They could feel the heat from miles away, a promise of the death that was coming for them all. The fire struck Naruto, and it vanished. It did not dissipate or scatter. The colossal wall of flame simply flowed into him, drawn into his body as if he were a vacuum. The golden lightning around him flared brighter, hungrier. He stood completely unharmed. The fire's roar replaced once more by the howl of the wind he commanded. Madara's eyes widened. You ate it. Naruto looked down at his own hand, watching the lightning dance. He had found the fruit years ago, deep in a forgotten shrine in the land of whirlpools, his ancestral home. A strange, pulsating fruit with a spiral pattern, humming with an energy that called to the storm already brewing in his soul. The Kami Kami no Mi, model, Raijin. The God fruit. He hadn't understood what it was then. He just knew it felt more like home than Konoha ever had. Some gods are born of fire, Naruto said, his voice resonating with the low rumble of thunder. I am not one of them. With a gesture of contempt, Madara manifested his perfect Susanoo, the colossal blue samurai of pure chakra rising to dwarf the Gedo statue. It drew its twin katanas, each blade capable of cleaving a mountain. The sheer pressure of its existence silenced the storm for a moment. Naruto did not move. He simply raised his right hand toward the heavens. The black clouds began to swirl faster, converging into a vortex directly above the battlefield. The pressure became unbearable. The air grew thick, tasting of ozone. A light began to grow within the vortex, a pinpoint that expanded with terrifying speed. A spear descended from the heart of the sky. It was not made of chakra or metal. It was a spear of pure, solidified lightning, miles long and shrieking with the fury of 1,000 storms. It fell with impossible speed, and the Susanoo, the ultimate defense, raised its swords to block. The sound of the impact was absolute, a whiteout of pure energy and sound that deafened and blinded every living thing. When vision returned, the Susanoo was gone. Not broken, not shattered. It was simply gone, and Madara stood alone, his arm regenerating from a stump, his face a perfect picture of disbelief. Naruto ignored him. He had one more thing to do. He looked down, through the Gedo statue's head, at the churning mass of stolen chakra within it, the life force of the tailed beasts, the power source for Madara's deluded dream of a perfect world. He felt Kurama, the 9 tails sealed within him, stir in silent acknowledgement. They had come to an understanding long ago, 2 prisoners in the same cell. He brought his hands together, and a familiar blue sphere of swirling energy began to form. But this was no ordinary Rasengan. It was not the size of a ball, but of a boulder, then a house. It was a miniature galaxy of wind and lightning, a contained hurricane so dense it bent the light around it. This world of yours, Naruto said, his voice now a booming echo of thunder and wind, is a lie. He didn't thrust it forward. He simply let it go. The Rasengan fell. The moment it touched the Gedo statue, the world ended. There was no explosion, not in the traditional sense. There was only erasure. The Gedo statue, a being of continental power, did not crumble or break. He ground for a mile in every direction around it, was wiped from existence, replaced by a perfectly smooth, glass-lined crater that steamed in the sudden, torrential downpour. The black clouds, their purpose served, finally released their burden. Madara, caught at the edge of the blast, was simply gone, his resurrected body and grand ambitions unmade by a power he could not comprehend. The rain began to wash the blood from the mud. The allied forces stood in stunned, terrified silence. The war was over. The enemy was gone. But no one was cheering. They were staring at the lone figure descending from the sky, landing softly in the center of the crater he had made. Their savior. Their monster. From his command post, the 4th Raikage, trembled, not with fear, but with a rage born of it. That is not a shinobi. That is an abomination. He looked at his own lightning-clad fist, a power he had honed his entire life, and it felt like a child's sparkler in comparison. Gaara's sand swirled nervously around him. He understood. He had once been a monster, a weapon feared by his own village. But Naruto had not just embraced the power. He had become it. He had transcended the very concept of a Jinchuriki and become something else entirely. A force of nature. Naruto stood in the rain, letting it wash over him. He felt their fear. He felt their awe. He felt the weight of air calculations as they surely planned how to subdue him, how to control him, how to use him. The same story, over and over again. He closed his eyes. He had no home here. He would never be free as long as this continent knew his name. So, he would make them forget. He would give them a world without him. A world without gods or monsters. He vanished. Not in a puff of smoke or a flicker of speed, but by transforming into a single, pure bolt of golden lightning that shot into the sky and streaked toward the horizon. From a watchtower in the land of lightning, a sensor shinobi screamed as his instruments overloaded. A massive energy signature, it's moving along the entire coastline. Unbelievable speed. In the hidden mist, fishermen watched as the sea began to boil, churning into a frenzy. As a golden light raced across the surface of the water, faster than any ship. All along the perimeter of the elemental nations, from the frozen north of the land of iron to the southern shores of the land of fire, Naruto moved. He was not just running, he was weaving a jutsu on a scale never before imagined. He poured his very essence, the divine power of the storm god within him, into the sea and the sky. The sea rose up, forming a wall of water 1,000 feet high. The sky darkened, the clouds gathering into a permanent, impassable bank of black thunderheads. Winds of hurricane force began to blow inward. A perpetual storm that would shred any ship that dared to try and cross it. He was building a cage. And he was locking himself out. When it was done, he stood on a stolen skiff, bobbing on the waves of an open, unknown ocean. Behind him, a wall of impenetrable storm raged, a monument to his departure. The great storm of the elemental nations, a phenomenon that would baffle and elate his people for generations to come. In front of him, the sea was vast and blue, the sky clear. The air tasted different. It tasted of salt and freedom. He was alone, a boy on a boat with nothing but the clothes on his back and the power of a god in his veins. For the first time since he could remember, he felt a flicker of something that felt dangerously like peace. He was no longer a Jinchuriki, a hero, a weapon, or a monster. He was just Naruto, and his journey had just begun. The air in the chamber of the 5 elders was silent, still, and cold. 5 ancient men sat on their designated platforms, their faces carved with the weight of centuries of secrets. The vast, opulent room in Pangaea Castle was a world away from the mud and blood of Naruto's former life. "The reports are troubling," said the tall, blonde elder with the long beard, his fingers steepled before him. "Troubling is an understatement," countered the bald elder who held a sword across his lap, his voice like grinding stones. "A section of the sea, larger than any known kingdom, has become permanently impassable. A storm that defies all meteorological understanding has simply appeared. It shields a previously uncharted landmass," the elder with the prominent mustache added, gesturing to a glowing map projected in the center of the room. A vast, circular area on the edge of the known world was now a swirling vortex of red, indicating extreme and constant danger. An energy reading was detected just before its formation. The youngest-looking elder, with a scar over his eye, stated flatly. "A signature unlike anything in our archives. Not hockey, not devil fruit, not related to the ancient weapons." "It was divine," the 5th elder whispered, his voice thin and reedy. He was the oldest, the 1W. Ho stared most often toward the empty passageway that led deeper into the castle's heart. A power not seen since. He trailed off, unwilling to speak the name of that forbidden century. The blonde elder sighed, his gaze drifting towards that same dark passage. "The balance is delicate. Any new weight, any unaccounted for piece on the board, is a threat to it." They fell silent, the unspoken truth hanging in the air between them. Their power was not absolute. They were wardens, not masters. The true master resided deeper within. Miles away, in a hidden garden where impossible butterflies flitted through the air. A shadowed figure stood before a massive, detailed map of the world. The figure was tall and unnaturally slender, its form hidden by a flowing black robe. It was a Mu. A single, slender finger reached out, tracing the edge of the newly appeared storm on the map. The map did not ripple, but the very air in the room seemed to grow cold where the finger passed. A butterfly, its wings the color of the dawn sky, landed gently on Imu's outstretched hand. In a small, ornate holder nearby, a single candle flickered. It was one of many, but this one had just appeared, its flame burning a brilliant, defiant gold. It represented a new life, a new will, a new power in the world. Amu looked from the map to the golden flame. The butterfly on its hand beat its wings once, twice, then fell to the floor, a lifeless husk. Imu's gaze remained fixed on the candle. The flame wavered, as if struck by some unseen wind, threatening to go out. But it did not. Instead, the golden flame burned brighter, stronger. A tiny sun defying the encroaching darkness. A silent challenge had been issued across the world. And Amu had taken notice. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Archaeologist and the Deity. The sea had a rhythm the elemental nations had lacked. It was a slow, deep breath, the swell and fall of the water a constant, soothing presence. For weeks, Naruto sailed. His small skiff was blah inadequate for the vastness of the ocean, but it didn't matter. The wind was his engine, the currents his rudder. He learned the language of the waves and the moods of the sky not as a sailor, but as a part of them. He could taste a coming squall in the air, feel the shift in barometric pressure in his bones. He slept under star-dusted skies so clear they hurt to look at, skies that had never been polluted by the chakra of warring nations. He was not lonely. Solitude was an old friend, but this was different. This was not the crushing isolation of a village that shunned him, but the liberating emptiness of a world waiting to be discovered. He would sometimes dissolve into his lightning form, a golden streak of pure energy, and race the flying fish, his laughter a crackle of static over the waves. He was learning control, finesse. The power of Raijin was not just a cudgel for obliterating armies, it was a tool for interacting with the world. He could charge the air with static to fish from the water for his dinner or create a small, contained updraft to dry his clothes. He was a god learning the quiet joys of mortality. His journey eventually led him into a sea of ghosts. A thick, oppressive fog rolled in, clinging to the water like a shroud and swallowing the sun. The air grew cold, and the cheerful rhythm of the ocean was replaced by a dead, unsettling calm. Wrecked ships, ancient and modern, drifted silently out of the mist, their sails torn, their decks empty. They were ghost ships, monuments to forgotten tragedies. Naruto felt a familiar chill, the echo of a place filled with death and regret. The Florian Triangle, guided by an instinct he couldn't explain, a pull towards a flicker of life in this dead sea, he directed his skiff toward a large, jagged shadow that resolved into an island. It was a place of black rock and skeletal trees, perpetually shrouded in the triangle's gray twilight. Crumbling towers and collapsed archways spoke of a civilization long since turned to dust. He beached his skiff and stepped onto the black sand. The air was heavy with the scent of damp stone and decay. He moved through the ruins with a shinobi's silence, his senses on high alert. He could feel it more clearly now, a single, steady heartbeat in the heart of the ruins. It was a cautious heart, guarded and wary. It felt familiar. In the center of the island, in the broken walls of what might have been a grand temple, he found her. She stood with her back to him, her attention fixed on a colossal stone cube covered in strange, angular script. A poneglyph. Her dark hair was cut in a neat bob, and she wore a simple, practical outfit of leather and dark cloth. Even from behind, she radiated an aura of intense focus and quiet intelligence. She was so engrossed in her work, tracing the ancient characters with a gloved hand, that she didn't seem to notice his approach. But she had. "If you are a ghost, you are the loudest I have ever encountered," she said without turning, her voice a low, melodic contralto. It was calm, but with an edge of steel beneath it. "State your purpose." Naruto stopped a respectful distance away. "No ghost. Just a traveler. I saw the island and thought I'd rest." She finally turned, and Naruto felt a jolt of recognition. Not of her face, but of her eyes. They were a startling, intelligent blue, but deep within them was a profound weariness. The look of someone who had been running her entire life. He had seen that look in the mirror every morning for years. She was young, perhaps his age, but her expression carried the weight of someone much older. Her gaze swept over him, analytical and sharp. She took in his strange clothes, the powerful calm in his stance, the way the mist seemed to subtly avoid him. She was assessing him, categorizing him, searching for the threat. "This is a poor place to rest," she said, her tone level. "The dead are not the only things that haunt this sea." Suddenly, the ground at Naruto's feet sprouted a dozen pale, slender arms. They erupted from the stone floor, reaching for his ankles, his wrists, his throat. It was a silent, instantaneous attack. Naruto didn't move. Just before the hands could touch him, a faint golden aura flickered around his body. The disembodied hands froze, inches from his skin, unable to complete their action. They trembled, as if trying to push through an invisible wall. The woman's eyes widened slightly, the only outward sign of her shock. Her trump card, the surprise attack that had saved her life countless times, had failed utterly. Hana no mi, Naruto said, his voice as calm as before. Flower fruit, I've read about them. The devil fruits. They say a sea devil lives inside each one. He looked at the frozen hands, then back at her. Yours doesn't feel like a devil. The arms vanished back into the stone as quickly as they had appeared. The woman's composure was flawless, but Naruto could feel the sudden spike in her heart rate. She had revealed her power. And he had not even flinched. Who are you? She asked, the steel in her voice now undisguised. Naruto. He offered no surname, no village, no rank. Just a name. She weighed this for a long moment. I am Robin. An understanding passed between them. They were two people in a forgotten ruin, both using single names as shields. They were both hiding from something. Before the conversation could continue, a new sound intruded. The crunch of boots on gravel, the clank of metal, and the low murmur of voices. Dozens of them. They were being surrounded. Robin's body went rigid, a flicker of genuine fear finally breaking through her stoic mask. She instinctively took a step back, positioning herself between Naruto and the poneglyph, as if to protect it. Men in garish, mismatched outfits began to filter through the broken archways, brandishing swords and rifles. They all bore a strange symbol, the mark of Baroque works. They parted to allow their leader to stride forward. He was a large man with a cruel smile and a bowler hat, chomping on a cigar. Miss All Sunday, the man boomed, his eyes fixated on Robin. You have been a very naughty girl. The boss doesn't like it when his favorite little pet runs off her leash. He sent us to bring you back. Or, if you resist, to bring back what's left. Robin's face was a pale, emotionless mask. I have fulfilled my contract, Mr. 9. I found the poneglyph for Crocodile. I owe him nothing more. The boss disagrees. Mr. 9 laughed. He thinks you know more than you've told him. And he wants to persuade you to share. Now, who's your friend? He sneered at Naruto. Another stray you picked up. Doesn't matter. We'll dispose of him. Naruto watched the exchange with a detached curiosity. He saw the way they looked at Robin, not as a person, but as a thing, a tool, a possession. He saw the cold sweat on the back of her neck, the slight tremor in her hands she tried so desperately to hide. He saw the resignation in her eyes, the expression of someone who had been cornered like this 100 times before and expected to be cornered 100 times more. It was the same look he'd seen on the faces of Konoha's villagers when the Anbu came for him. He stepped forward, placing himself between Robin and the Baroque Works agents. His movement was casual, unhurried, yet it instantly drew every eye. Mr. 9 scowled. Get out of the way. You pathetic vagrant. This has nothing to do with you. She said she doesn't want to go with you, Naruto said, his voice dangerously quiet. The agent's face contorted in a parody of disbelief, followed by a burst of laughter. His men joined in, a chorus of mocking chuckles that echoed off the ancient stones. Did you hear that, boys? He's defending her. What are you going to do, big man? Fight us all. Naruto didn't answer. He simply looked up at the gray, perpetual twilight of the sky above the ruins. He raised one hand. For a moment, nothing happened. Mr. 9's smile widened. See, nothing but hot eye. His words were cut short by a sound that was not a sound, but a feeling. A pressure change in the air so sudden it made their ears pop. A brilliant flash of light. A deafening crack that seemed to split the world in two. A single, searingly bright bolt of lightning descended from the seemingly clear sky. It did not strike the agents. It struck their fleet anchored just off the coast. The bolt hit the lead ship, and for a split second, the entire vessel was illuminated, its every plank and rope visible, before it erupted into a blossoming flower of fire and splinters. The lightning then arced, impossibly, from the exploding ship to the next, and the next, a chain reaction of divine fury. In the space of 3 seconds, the entire fleet was a funeral pyre on the black water. Silence descended upon the ruins, broken only by the distant crackle of burning wood. The Baroque Works agents stood frozen, their mouths agape, their faces reflecting the orange glow of their burning ships. Their escape was gone. Their confidence was shattered. They stared at Naruto, who hadn't moved a muscle, his hand still casually raised. Robin stared at him too, her composure completely gone. Her mind, her greatest asset, was failing to process what it had just seen. There were no storm clouds. There was no jutsu, no incantation. He had simply pointed, and the heavens had obeyed. This wasn't the power of a devil fruit as she understood it. This was something else, something older, something absolute. Naruto lowered his hand and turned his gaze back to the terrified agents. He didn't look angry. He didn't look triumphant. He looked disappointed. "I don't like bullies," he said, and his voice was the only thing that moved in the dead quiet. He took a single step forward. That was all it took. The spell of terror was broken, replaced by primal instinct. Mr. Nine screamed, a high, thin sound of pure panic, and turned to run. His men followed suit, scrambling over each other, dropping their weapons. Their only thought to escape the man who commanded the sky. They fled into the mists of the island, their terrified shouts fading into the distance. The ruins were quiet again. The only evidence of the confrontation was the distant, burning ships and the lingering smell of ozone. Naruto turned back to Robin. She was leaning against the poneglyph, her knuckles white where she gripped the stone. She was looking at him not as a savior, but as one would look at a typhoon or an earthquake, a terrifying, unpredictable force of nature that had, for some reason, chosen to spare her. He walked toward her, stopping a few feet away. He saw the fear in her eyes and it pained him. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly. "What are you?" she whispered, the question raw and genuine. Naruto considered this for a moment. What was he? A shinobi, a Jinchuriki, a god? He was all of those things, and none of them. "I'm like you," he answered finally. Someone who was hunted for something they never asked for. That simple statement seemed to reach her in a way the display of power had not. The fear in her eyes didn't vanish, but it was joined by a flicker of something else. Confusion, curiosity, understanding. For the first time, she looked at him not as a monster, but as a person. He looked at the poneglyph she was so determined to protect, then back at her. He saw her whole life in that moment. The burning of her home, the constant betrayals, the endless running. He saw a soul as lonely as his own. "Come with me," he said. The offer was simple, direct. "I don't have a ship anymore. But I'll figure it out. We'll find what you're looking for. All these stones you're chasing. And I'll make sure no one ever hunts you again." Robin stared at him, her brilliant mind trying to find the angle. The trap, the inevitable betrayal. She had survived by aligning herself with powerful, dangerous men. Crocodile was only the latest. But they always wanted something. They wanted to use her. To control her knowledge. This man, he offered nothing but freedom. Protection without a price tag. It was a concept so alien to her that it seemed more impossible than the lightning he had summoned. But she had seen his power. And more than that, she had seen his eyes. There was no greed in them, no ambition, no cruelty. Only a calm, quiet strength and a deep, resonant loneliness that mirrored her own. For the first time in 20 years, she allowed herself a dangerous thought. What if he was telling the truth? Her decision was not logical. It was a leap of faith. A gamble made by a woman who had nothing left to lose. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Naruto smiled, a small, genuine smile that seemed to light up the gray ruins. "Anywhere we want." Miles away, crouched in the skeletal branches of a dead tree, a man in a white suit adjusted the focus on his binoculars. He had long, squarish nostrils and a calm, almost lazy demeanor. His name was Kaku, a shipwright of Galila Company on a covert intelligence gathering mission for Cipher Pole 9. His target had been Nico Robin. He lowered his binoculars, his face uncharacteristically serious. He had seen the whole thing. The Baroque works fleet, the boy in the yellow coat, the impossible lightning. He hadn't felt a flicker of hockey. It was not the work of a known Logia. It was different, primordial. He brought a small, black den mushi from his pocket. It rang once before being answered. "Spandam," Kaku said, his voice low and urgent. "The mission has a complication. The target, Nico Robin. She has acquired a new associate. The voice on the other end was reedy and impatient. An associate. Eliminate them. Your orders were to observe and, if the opportunity arose, capture the devil child. Don't tell me you're getting soft, Kaku. Kaku watched as Naruto, using a swirling vortex of wind, began to lift the remains of his shattered skiff from the water, while Robin watched. A look of stunned fascination on her face. Elimination is not an option, Kaku said, his voice flat. Spandam. I just watched him destroy a 10-ship fleet with a single thought. He called lightning from a clear sky. There was silence on the other end. I am recommending we upgrade the threat level of Nico Robin to maximum, Kaku continued. She is no longer just a historical liability. She is now associated with an entity of, I don't even know how to classify it. It's a power I have never seen before. He paused, searching for the right word. It was like watching a myth come to life. He hung up before Spandam could shriek another order. He would file his full report later. For now, he would simply watch. The world had just changed, and he had been the only one there to witness it. A new piece was on the board, one that obeyed none of the known rules. And it had just allied itself with the one woman who knew how to uncover all the world's most dangerous secrets. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Water. The city of Water 7 was a symphony of life. After the dead silence of the Florian Triangle, the sheer, unadulterated noise was a shock. It was the rhythmic thud of 1,000 hammers on wood, the hiss of steam from strange, puffing vehicles that traversed the canals, the cheerful shouts of vendors selling mizu meat, and the constant, gurgling rush of water. The city was a miracle of architecture, a multi-layered fountain of blue-roofed buildings and winding waterways, all held together by a network of bridges and elevators. For Naruto, it was intoxicating. He stood on the prow of a small, makeshift raft, propelled not by a sail but by a controlled, steady breeze he summoned with a flick of his wrist. He had pieced the vessel together from the wreckage of the Baroque Works fleet. The wood still smelling faintly of smoke and ozone. His control was fine enough now that he could weave the wind like a thread, pushing them gently through the bustling canals. He grinned, a wide, honest grin that seemed out of place on a man who could level mountains. Look at this place, he said, his voice full of genuine wonder. It's like someone built a city inside a waterfall. Nico Robin stood beside him, her posture relaxed but her eyes constantly moving. Where Naruto saw life, she saw systems. She saw the flow of commerce, the tension between the shipwrights in their different docks. The subtle presence of well-dressed men who walked with a little too much purpose. She had survived by reading the currents of society, and Water 7 had a powerful, dangerous undertow. It is one of the world's foremost shipbuilding hubs, she supplied, her voice a calm counterpoint to his excitement. Its technology and its craftsmen are legendary. She offered him a small, wry smile. It is also a city with a great many secrets. They found lodging in a small inn overlooking one of the main canals. From their balcony, they could watch the Yagara bulls, flat-bodied creatures used as water taxis. Ferry citizens from one level of the city to another. The room was simple, but for two people who had spent their lives sleeping in forests, ruins, or the cold confines of a hidden base. It was a luxury. Their dynamic settled into a comfortable rhythm. Naruto, with his open nature and easy charisma, was the one who went out for supplies. He'd return with AR-MFULS of food and a head full of stories, having charmed the local bakers and butchers with his straightforward questions and infectious energy. They saw a powerful young man with a strange coat and a smile that held no deceit. And they responded in kind. Robin was the listener. She would spend hours in the city's libraries and cafes, nursing a single cup of coffee, her ears open to the whispers tea had flowed through the city as surely as the water in its canals. She was a ghost, blending into the background, her mind a sponge for every rumor and piece of gossip. That evening, as the setting sun painted the water in hues of orange and purple, they sat on their balcony, sharing a meal of grilled sea king. There's a pirate crew here, Robin said, breaking a comfortable silence. The Straw Hats. They caused a commotion at the main dock. Their ship is apparently beyond repair. Naruto grunted, swallowing a large piece of fish. Tough break. A good ship is hard to find. He looked at his own makeshift raft tied up below. Tell me about it. Their captain tried to fight the entire galley company, Robin continued, her eyes focused on the middle distance. And there was an assassination attempt on the mayor, Iceberg. That got Naruto's attention. He paused, his food forgotten. Assassination. Sounds familiar. He thought of the endless plots and counterplots of the shinobi world. The kunai in the dark and the whispers of betrayal. He had hoped to leave that behind. The culprits were described as masked figures, Robin said. But the city's mood has shifted. Everyone is on edge. They whisper about the government. About Cypher Pole. Naruto's eyes narrowed. The name meant nothing to him, but he understood the weight she gave it. Government agents. The world government's secret intelligence agency. She confirmed. They operate in the shadows. If they are here, it's for a reason far bigger than a broken pirate ship. She took a sip of her tea. They are looking for something. Something Iceberg is rumored to possess. The blueprints for an ancient weapon. Pluton. Naruto leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking in protest. An ancient, powerful weapon. A government desperate to control it. He had played a starring role in this exact story once before. It had ended with him turning his back on his entire world. And they hunt you, he said, the words a statement, not a question. Robin's gaze met his. There was no fear in her expression, only a quiet confirmation. They always hunt me. For 20 years, since they destroyed my home. They hunt me for the knowledge I carry. The ability to read these poneglyphs. She gestured vaguely, as if to the stone she'd been studying when they met. The ability to revive the very weapons they seek to control. He saw it then, the grand, ugly hypocrisy of it all. The world government declared her existence a crime because she could uncover these weapons, while they themselves scoured the globe to possess them. They weren't trying to protect the world. They were trying to corner the market on its destruction. It's the same old song, Naruto said, his voice low and hard. He felt a familiar anger, not the hot rage of his youth, but a cold, deep fury. The anger of a man who had seen the same mistakes made, the same lives ruined, by the same lust for power. What was your home like? Robin asked suddenly, her voice soft, sensing the shift in his mood. Naruto was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the vibrant, living city. It was loud, he said, his voice distant. Full of people, full of life. He paused. But I was always in the quiet part. Quote. Robin didn't press. She didn't need to. She understood the language of isolation. She heard the words he wasn't saying. The loneliness, the ostracism, the feeling of being on the outside looking in. In that moment of shared understanding, the bond between them solidified, turning from a pragmatic alliance into a genuine kinship. They were two sides of the same coin. A boy who was hated for the power inside him and a woman who was hunted for the knowledge inside her. The next day, as they walked through the bustling shipyards of Dock 1, a man passed them. He was tall and slender, with a top hat that held a live pigeon. He moved with a languid grace that seemed at odds with the hard labor of the yard. For a split second, his eyes met Naruto's. Naruto felt a sudden, primal chill. The man's eyes were cold, dead, and utterly devoid of emotion. They were the eyes of a predator, calm, patient, and absolutely lethal. Naruto had seen eyes like that before, on shinobi who had forgotten they were human and had become mere tools of death. But this was different. Beneath the coldness, Naruto sensed a coiled spring of immense physical power, a bloodless chi so perfectly controlled it was almost invisible. The man was a killer, and a master of his craft. Rob Lucci, in his guise as a Galila shipwright, registered the man in the yellow coat. He saw the powerful build, the confident stride. But his senses, honed by a lifetime of training and the instincts of his carnivorous zone fruit, screamed at him. This man was not just strong. He was dangerous. Lucci couldn't feel hockey from him in the traditional sense, but he could feel a presence. An immense, dormant energy, like the stillness in the air before a lightning strike. It was a pressure that made the hairs on his arms stand up. Lucci dismissed the straw hats from his mind. They were a problem, but a quantifiable one. This man was an unknown variable. A wild card of terrifying potential. He filed the information away, his face betraying nothing, and continued on his way, the pigeon on his hat cooing softly. Naruto stopped, looking over his shoulder at the retreating figure. Who was that? Robin followed his gaze, her expression turning grim. I don't know his name. But he is one of the 5 foremen of Dock 1. And he is one of the men I saw near Iceberg's mansion the night of the attack. She had seen him from a distance, a silent shadow among the others. Cipher Pole. They continued their walk, the vibrant energy of the city now feeling fragile, a thin veneer over a dark, churning conflict. They saw the Straw Hat Pirates, a strange and chaotic group, arguing with a long-nosed boy who seemed to be quitting their crew. It was a scene of high emotion and personal drama. But Naruto and Robin saw it for what it was, a distraction from the real battle being fought in the city's shadows. That night, the storm broke. Aqua Laguna, the city's annual high tide, was approaching. And the government made its move. The city was thrown into chaos as CP9 revealed themselves, abducting the shipwright Frankie and revealing their true identities. They had found the blueprints. And they had captured their primary target. From their balcony, Naruto and Robin watched the sea train, the Puffing Tom, depart, its lights cutting a swath through the darkening, stormy waters. It was headed for Eni's lobby. The Judiciary Island, the world government's fortress of absolute justice. Robin was gone. Naruto found the note in their room. It was simple, her handwriting neat and precise. They have something I cannot risk. This is my battle, not yours. Thank you for the peace, however brief. Naruto crushed the paper in his fist. He looked at the departing train, a speck of light in the growing storm. He felt the wind and rain lashing against his face. He felt the rage building inside him, the thunder gathering in his soul. She had run, not from him, but for him. She had chosen to sacrifice herself. To walk back into the cage she had just escaped, to protect the one person who had offered her a hand without wanting anything in return. It was the most selfless, and the most foolish, thing he had ever seen. He thought of her quiet strength, her insatiable curiosity, the deep sadness in her eyes that had begun to fade during their time together. He thought of her small, rare smiles. The government wanted their weapon. They wanted their sacrifice. They wanted to maintain their cruel, suffocating order. He would give them a storm instead. Lightning flashed, illuminating his face. It was a mask of calm, resolute fury. He was done running. He was done hiding. The shinobi world had tried to cage him. The world government was trying to cage the first person in years who had made him feel like he had a home. He turned to the empty room, a silent promise hanging in the air. They hunt you for what you know, he whispered. They hunt men for weapons. It's the same story. He walked out onto the balcony, the wind whipping his coat around him. He looked out at the raging sea, at the distant light of the train. Let's show them what happens when the hunted fight back. He dissolved into a bolt of pure, golden lightning, a streak of divine anger that shot out over the waves, easily outpacing the sea train. He was no longer a traveler. He was no longer a wanderer. He was a force of nature. And he was coming to tear down their fortress of lies. In an office in Marine headquarters, Fleet Admiral Sengoku stared at a report, his brow furrowed. The goat by his side chewed placidly on a piece of paper. Unidentified entity, codename, Raijin. Sengoku read aloud, his voice heavy with disbelief. Kaku's report from Water 7. He claims this Raijin entity is the same one observed in the Florian Triangle. That he can summon lightning from a clear sky. That his power is not a devil fruit. What is this, a child's fairy tale? Vice Admiral Garp, who had been loudly crunching on rice crackers in the corner, stopped mid-chew. Sounds exciting. Sengoku shot him a glare. This is serious, Garp. Nico Robin has been captured by CP9 and is en route to Eni's lobby. But, this new associate of hers, Kaku insists he's a threat on the level of an emperor. So send an admiral, Garp said simply, resuming his crunching. Kuzan is nearby, isn't he? I've already put him on standby, Sengoku admitted, rubbing his temples. But something about this feels wrong. A power that isn't hockey, isn't a devil fruit, it disrupts the balance. It disrupts everything we understand about the world. He looked at the codename again. Raijin, the storm god of forgotten legends. An unsettling premonition washed over him. The world was built on a delicate balance of the three great powers. But a god, he realized, would obey no such rules. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Storm of Justice. The Puffing Tom was a marvel of engineering, a train that rode on the sea, defying the very laws of nature. But nature was reasserting itself with a vengeance. Aqua Laguna was a force that even the shipwrights of Water 7 respected, a high tide that could swallow entire districts. Tonight, however, the storm had a heart. A furious, golden heart that was racing across the waves. Naruto was no longer a man on a raft. He was a being of pure energy, a living thunderbolt skipping across the churning surface of the ocean. The sea spray did not touch him, it vaporized in his wake. The roaring wind was his cloak. Inside this form, his thoughts were unnervingly clear, stripped of all but a single, crystalline purpose: get her back. He saw Eni's lobby in the distance. It was not an island so much as a declaration. A massive stone gate that opened onto nothing, a tower that pierced the perpetual daylight of its sky. And a waterfall that flowed into an abyss. A fortress built on a pillar of rock in the middle of nowhere, connected to the world by a single, fragile bridge. It was a monument to an arrogant, unyielding form of justice. Naruto felt a grim smile form on his non-existent face. He would show them what happened to monuments when the storm came. He did not slow. He did not seek a subtle entrance. He was the storm. He merged with the raging winds of Aqua Laguna, amplifying its fury 100-fold. The waves, already massive, swelled into liquid mountains. The sky, already dark, turned an absolute, suffocating black. On the battlements of Eni's lobby, thousands of Marines and government agents stared in horror as the weather went from dangerous to apocalyptic in the space of a heartbeat. Rain fell like glass shards. The wind shrieked with a sentient rage. And then the lightning began. It did not just flash in the sky. It came down in solid, searing pillars that struck the watchtowers, shattering them into rubble. It walked across the water, turning the sea into a boiling cauldron. The gates of justice, a symbol of the world government's power for centuries, were struck by a bolt so massive it cracked the stone from top to bottom before the immense gates were simply blown from their hinges. The alarm bells began to shriek, their frantic clangor all but lost in the howl of the wind. Naruto landed in the main courtyard, his lightning form coalescing back into a human shape. He stood in the center of the unnatural storm, the rain and wind parting around him as if he stood behind an invisible shield. The soldiers scrambled, officers shouting orders that were swallowed by the thunder. They saw him, a lone figure in a tattered yellow coat, the epicenter of the impossible tempest. Fire! Fire at will! A captain screamed, pointing a trembling finger. 1,000 rifles discharged. A dozen cannons fired. The volley of lead and iron flew toward him. Naruto raised a single hand, palm outward. An invisible wall of pure electrostatic energy materialized in front of him. The bullets stopped dead in the air, a foot from his face, suspended in a shimmering field. The cannonballs, carrying far more momentum, struck the field and were instantly magnetized, clinging to it like iron filings to a lodestone. With a casual flick of his wrist, he reversed the polarity. The entire volley shot back at twice its original speed. The front rank of soldiers vanished in a spray of red and a shriek of ricocheting metal. Panic, absolute and primal, broke their discipline. They were soldiers trained to fight pirates and revolutionaries. They had no protocol for fighting a god. Naruto ignored them. He could feel her, a steady, familiar presence, a life force he had come to know as well as his own. She was in the tower. He started walking, his pace unhurried. The soldiers who stood in his path were not struck down. They simply collapsed, their bodies twitching as the static charge in the air overloaded their nervous systems. He moved through the courtyard of unconscious bodies, a silent, walking plague. He reached the base of the Tower of Justice. The doors were thick steel. He didn't bother to open them. He simply walked through them, his body dissolving into lightning for a split second before reforming on the other side, leaving two perfectly human-shaped, molten holes in the metal. He ascended, not by stairs, but by riding a current of electricity straight up through the core of the building. He passed floors filled with terrified officials and scrambling agents. He ignored them all. They were irrelevant. On a balcony near the top, Rob Lucci stood with the rest of CP9, watching the chaos below. He was preternaturally calm, but the pigeon on his shoulder was flapping its wings in terror. Our mysterious friend from Water 7, it seems, Kaku observed, his face grim. His arrival is more dramatic than I anticipated. He's a fool, Jabra sneered. No matter how powerful he is, he's one man against the full might of the world government. Lucci said nothing. His senses were screaming. The pressure, the dormant energy he had felt in Water 7, was now fully awake. It was a raging inferno that pressed down on the entire island. He looked at his own hands, the hands of a master of the 6 powers, the government's ultimate assassin. For the first time since he was a child, he felt a sliver of doubt. The ceiling above them exploded inward. Naruto dropped to the floor, landing in a crouch. He stood up, his blue eyes scanning the assembled agents. They instinctively took combat stances. Khalifa, with her bubbles. Kaku, with his twin swords. Jabra, with his claws. Where is she? Naruto's voice was dangerously calm. The devil child is property of the world government. Bluno stated, his voice flat as he opened an air door, preparing a flanking maneuver. You will not interfere. Naruto's eyes flicked to him. Door fruit. He vanished, not with speed, but simply by ceasing to be there. He reappeared directly in front of Bluno, his hand on the agent's chest. A single, visible spark of golden energy jumped from his palm. Bluno's yes rolled back into his head and he collapsed, smoke rising from his suit. His air door flickered and died. The other agents stared in shock. It had happened faster than their eyes could track. I'm not asking again, Naruto said, his gaze sweeping over the rest of them. This time, they attacked. It was not a fight. It was a lesson in futility. Khalifa's golden hour sent a wave of soap bubbles Chi cleansed and smoothed anything they touched. They popped a few feet from Naruto, neutralized by the ionized air around him. Kaku's Rankyaku, Amanetachi, a storm of flying sword slashes, was parried by a single finger. Each crescent of air was met with a tiny, explosive crackle of lightning that dissipated it harmlessly. Jabra lunged, his claws aimed at Naruto's throat, only to find himself clawy. Ing at empty air as Naruto's body became intangible lightning, flowing around the attack before reforming behind him. A gentle tap on the back of Jabra's neck, charged with just enough voltage to shut down his brain, sent him to the floor. Only Lucci was left. He stood impassive, watching the utter dismantling of his team. So this is the power Kaku witnessed, he said, his voice a low growl. A Logia type, something like that, Naruto said, his eyes finally locking on Lucci. Now, step aside. I serve the world government, Lucci stated, his body beginning to smoke as he prepared for his transformation. My justice is absolute. I eliminate all who oppose it. It is for the greater good. There's no good in chains, Naruto said simply. He moved past Lucci, heading for the final door. Lucci lunged, his hand a perfect Shigen aimed at Naruto's spine. Naruto didn't even turn. A whip of golden lightning erupted from his back, wrapping around Lucci's arm and flinging him through the wall NTO the outer balcony where Spandam was dragging a sea stone chained Robin toward the bridge of hesitation. Naruto stepped through the hole Lucci had made. He saw her. Her face was pale, streaked with rain, but her eyes, when they met his, held not just fear, but a flicker of impossible hope. Naruto, she whispered. Told you I'd find you, he said with a small, reassuring smile. Spandam shrieked, a sound of pure terror. Lucci, kill him. That's an order. Rob Lucci rose from the rubble, his body now twisted and changed. He was larger, a monstrous hybrid of man and leopard, his tailored suit in tatters. You have made a grave error, he hissed, his voice a guttural growl. I am the ultimate weapon of Cypher Pole 9. I embody dark justice. I will eliminate you. You talk too much, Naruto replied, his patience finally gone. The fight was brutal and short. Lucci was a whirlwind of claws, fangs, and mastery of the 6 powers. He moved with blinding speed, his attacks powerful enough to shatter stone. But he was fighting a storm. His claws passed through Naruto's lightning form. His Rankyaku were absorbed. He finally managed to land a blow, a full-power Rokuogen, his ultimate technique, striking Naruto square in the chest. The shockwave blasted a hole in the tower wall behind Naruto. Robin cried out. For a moment, Naruto staggered back, a trickle of blood running from the corner of his mouth. He looked down at his chest, then back at Lucci, an expression of genuine surprise on his face. Not bad, he admitted. Lucci's momentary triumph vanished, replaced by horror. That had been his strongest attack. It should have liquefied his opponent's internal organs. Naruto's body flickered, and suddenly he was in front of Lucci, his fist cocked back. The fist was not just a fist. It was a contained sun. A sphere of swirling golden lightning so bright it hurt to look at. It was a Rasengan, but one forged in the heart of a thundercloud. My turn. He didn't need to shout a technique name. The impact was all that was needed. The lightning-infused Rasengan struck Lucci's chest. It did not explode. It drilled. The sound was of a billion volts of electricity grinding against the ultimate defense of Tekai. The Tekai shattered. Lucci's eyes went wide with pain and disbelief as the divine energy coursed through him, burning him from the inside out. He was thrown backward, not just off the balcony, but across the entire chasm, slamming into a distant tower with enough force to make it crumble. He did not get up. Naruto walked over to Robin, the sea stone shackles clinking. He touched the chains, and they sublimated into dust, the unique properties of sea stone meaningless against a power that was not born of a devil fruit. Are you okay? He asked, his voice soft again. Before she could answer, a blaring horn echoed across the island. Spandam, in his panic, had fumbled with a golden Den Mushi. The Buster Call. Robin gasped, her eyes wide with the remembered terror of her childhood. 10 warships, they're going to destroy the entire island. Naruto looked down. He saw the thousands of Marines, now scrambling to evacuate. He saw the warships on the horizon, their cannons turning toward them. He had the power to obliterate them all. To erase this island and everyone on it from existence. A part of him, the part that remembered the loneliness and the hate, wanted to. But he looked at Robin. He saw the terror on her face, the trauma of Ohara threatening to consume her. More destruction wouldn't save her. It would only prove her persecutors right. It would make him the monster they said she consorted with. He made his choice. Hold on, he said, pulling her close. He rose into the air, a golden aura flaring around him. He became the highest point on the island, a beacon in the storm. The warships fired, their cannons unleashing a volley of death. The cannonballs never reached the island. They exploded in midair, striking the shimmering dome of energy Naruto had projected. He was the eye of his own storm, and its fury was now directed not at the people, but at the island itself. He raised his hands to the sky, and all the lightning, all the fury of the storm, converged on him. He became a being of pure, blinding light. Then, he thrust his hands downward. He did not unleash an explosion. He unleashed a pulse, a wave of pure, kinetic force that shot down through the Tower of Justice, through the stone of the island, into its very foundations. The world shook. The great bridge of hesitation, the path to the gates of justice, cracked and collapsed into the abyss. The Tower of Justice groaned, then began to fall, crumbling into the raging sea. The entire island of Eni's lobby, the fortress of the world government, began to break apart, inking into the ocean under its own weight. It was a terrifying, beautiful, and strangely merciful act. He had destroyed the symbol, but given its people time to flee. As the island sank into the sea, Naruto, holding Robin securely, landed gently on the surface of the water, his feet held aloft by crackling platforms of lightning. They watched as the last remnants of the tower vanished beneath the waves. The world government's great fortress was gone. You didn't kill them, Robin whispered, her voice filled with awe. No more ghosts, Naruto said, looking at her. For either of us. He wrapped an arm around her, and in a final, brilliant flash of golden light, they vanished, leaving behind a raging sea where an island used to be. Hours later, the storm had passed. The sea was calm, lit, with the wreckage of a fallen fortress. A marine ship cut through the water, its yellow and white motif garishly bright against the gray sky. Admiral Kizaru stepped from his ship onto a large, floating piece of wall. His white suit immaculate, he looked around at the devastation, his usual lazy expression replaced by one of thoughtful curiosity. A battered, high-ranking vice admiral approached him, his uniform torn. His face pale with shock. Admiral Kizaru. Sir, the man stammered. It was just one man. Ooh, scary, Kizaru said, his tone dripping with his usual sarcasm, though his eyes were sharp. Tell me what happened. The vice admiral could only shake his head, gesturing wildly at the empty ocean. He came with the storm, or he was the storm. He commanded the lightning. He walked through walls. He defeated all of CP9, even Lucci, without effort. The man's voice dropped to a terrified whisper. And then, he sank the island. He just sank it. As a warning, Kizaru stopped, his lazy posture straightening for a fraction of a second. He looked down into the abyss where the Tower of Justice had stood. He had seen the power of emperors, the fury of the ancient weapons, the strength of the greatest hockey users in the world. But this was different. This was elemental, primal. He raised a yellow Den Mushi to his lips, its receiver shaped to mimic his own face. Sengoku, he said, his voice stripped of its usual mocking tone, replaced by a flat, professional seriousness. It's worse than we thought. He paused, looking out at the endless, empty sea. We are not hunting a man. We are hunting a myth. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. A Sea of Stars. The island was a jewel. After the perpetual storm of Eni's lobby and the gray melancholy of the Florian Triangle, its vibrant life was a balm to the soul. Naruto had found it after a day of aimless flight, a speck of emerald green in a vast sapphire sea. It was uninhabited, untouched, a small paradise of white sand beaches, lush jungle, and a single, gentle mountain at its center, from which a clear freshwater stream trickled down to the sea. Most importantly, it was shrouded. Using a fraction of his power, Naruto wove the clouds and the air currents around it, creating a permanent, localized weather system. Not a raging tempest, but a thick, impassable bank of fog and a zone of dead calm that would cause any normal ship to turn away. Its compass spinning uselessly, it was a sanctuary, hidden from the world by a whisper of the power that had shattered a fortress. For the first few days, they barely spoke. They were unwinding from a tension that had been coiled in their muscles for years, in Robin's case, for decades. They slept, ate the abundant fruit that grew on the island, and simply existed in the quiet. Naruto would spend hours floating on his back in the warm, clear water of the lagoon, staring up at a sky blessedly empty of warships. Robin would sit on the beach, a book she'd salvaged from their room in Water 7 in her lap. Though she rarely turned the pages, content to simply listen to the gentle crash of the waves. The silence wasn't awkward, it was a shared convalescence. They built a shelter, a simple but sturdy structure of wood and woven leaves at the edge of the jungle, overlooking the beach. Naruto did the heavy lifting, felling trees not with an axe, but with precise, rolled jolts of lightning that severed the trunks cleanly. He'd lift the massive logs with localized whirlwinds, his fine control over his abilities growing with every passing day. Robin, with her archaeologist's precision and the help of her sprouted limbs, handled the intricate work of weaving the roof and fitting the joints. They worked in a seamless, unspoken partnership, two people building their first real home together. Their days fell into a comfortable routine. Mornings were for exploration and gathering. Afternoons were for what they began to call training, though it felt more like discovery. Your power isn't from a devil fruit, Robin stated one afternoon, sitting cross-legged on the sand while Naruto stood waist-deep in the surf. There's no sea devil for the water to reject. But it behaves like a logia. You can become an element. You can generate it. What are its limits? Her curiosity was not academic, it was intimate. She studied his power with the same intensity she applied to a poneglyph. Seeing it as a language to be understood, a story to be read. Naruto shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. I don't know. He held up his hand, and a small, perfectly contained thunderstorm, the size of a glass jar, swirled above his palm. Tiny bolts of lightning crackled within it. I've never found them. The fruit they called the Kami Kami no Mi, it felt less like eating something new and more like waking something up. Something that was already there. Robin's eyes lit up with intellectual fascination. A power that resonates with the user's soul. A mythical zone, then. But of a type never recorded. A god is not an animal. Tell that to the people who tried to put me in a cage, Naruto said, his tone light but the memory behind it heavy. He looked at her, at the way her mind worked. Always probing, always seeking to understand. What about you? What are your limits? Robin looked at her own hands. The Hana no Mi has its weaknesses. I can only sprout limbs in places I can see. The limbs have my own strength. And if they are hurt, she trailed off, the memory of past battles clear on her face. Let's change that, Naruto said, wading out of the water. He walked up to her and held out his hand. "Give me your arm." Wary but trusting, she extended her arm. He gently placed his palm over her wrist. He closed his eyes, concentrating. A faint, golden glow emanated from his hand, enveloping her arm. It didn't burn. It was warm, like sunlight, and it made the hairs on her arm stand on end. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice a little breathless. "The human body runs on electrical signals from the brain," he explained, his voice low and focused. "Your power responds to your thoughts. I'm just speeding up the signal." He opened his eyes. "Now, try." Robin looked at a large piece of driftwood 20 yards down the beach. She concentrated, and an arm sprouted from its surface. But it wasn't the usual, instantaneous appearance. The arm snapped into existence. So fast it was a blur, cracking the air like a whip. Her eyes widened in shock. "Faster," Naruto encouraged, a grin spreading across his face. "Don't just place them. Throw them." She tried again, focusing on a dozen different spots along the shoreline. A forest of limbs erupted from the sand with gunshot speed. She could feel the connection, the feedback from her power, cleaner, sharper. Faster than ever before. He wasn't just boosting her speed, he was refining the connection between her mind and her ability. Over the next few weeks, they pushed the boundaries. He taught her to feel the static electricity in the air, allowing her to see and sprout limbs in places she couldn't physically see. She, in turn, helped him catalog his own abilities, devising applications he'd never considered, using magnetic fields to manipulate metal, creating precise medical defibrillations to restart a struggling animal's heart, even communicating over vast distances by encoding messages into radio waves. Their training was a form of conversation, a way of learning each other's deepest nature. His power was immense, instinctual, and wild. Her intellect was sharp, precise, and structured. Together, they were more than the sum of their parts. But it was the quiet moments that truly forged their bond. The nights were the most profound. They would sit by a small, crackling fire on the beach. The smoke curling up toward a sea of stars so brilliant they seemed close enough to touch. On this nameless island, far from the light of civilization, the galaxy was a vivid, breathtaking river of light. One night, after a long, comfortable silence, Robin spoke, her voice barely a whisper above the sound of the waves. "I used to dream of a place like this." Naruto looked at her. The firelight danced in her eyes, softening the edges that had been sharpened by a lifetime of hardship. "A quiet place. A place where I could read my books without looking over my shoulder," she said. A sad smile touching her lips. "A place where the people I was with weren't waiting for the right moment to betray me." Her gaze drifted to the fire. "Every time I found something close to a home, it was destroyed. Every person who showed me kindness was taken away. I began to believe I was the cause. A walking catastrophe. That my very existence brought ruin." Naruto listened, his heart aching with a familiar pain. He knew what it was to be seen as a curse. "You're not a catastrophe, Robin," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "You were just born into a world that was too afraid of the truth you carry." She finally looked at him, her eyes searching his. "And you, what do you carry?" "This divinity. You carry it so calmly. But I feel it, the weight of it. Does it never frighten you?" He stared into the flames. The memory of the ghetto statue's erasure, the sinking of Eni's lobby, flashing in his mind. "Every day," he admitted, his voice raw with a vulnerability he had never shown another living soul. "When I was a kid, I just wanted to be seen. I would have done anything for attention, for someone to acknowledge I was alive. Then I got this power, and suddenly everyone was looking. But they weren't seeing me. They were seeing a weapon. Or a monster. Or a god. Anything but Naruto." He took a deep breath. "The power, it wants to be used. It's a storm. It wants to rage. Sometimes, when I'm angry, I can feel it pulling at me, telling me how easy it would be to just wipe it all away. To erase the people who hurt me. To shatter their cities and boil their seas." He clenched his fist. "That's what frightens me. Not the lightning. Not the thunder. The part of me that whispers, yes." He turned to her, his blue eyes intense in the firelight. "Being with you, it makes it quiet. The storm inside. You don't look at me like a weapon. You look at me like me." Tears welled in Robin's eyes, shimmering like liquid starlight. For 20 years, she had built walls around her heart, thick and impenetrable. And this man, this impossible god of lightning with the soul of a lonely boy, had just walked right through them without even trying. He saw her not as the devil child, but as Robin. And she saw him not as Raijin, but as Naruto. She leaned forward, her movement slow, deliberate. He met her halfway. Their first kiss was not a clash of passion. It was a moment of quiet revelation. It was soft, hesitant, and tasted of salt and wood smoke. It was the feeling of two broken pieces finally clicking into place. It was a promise, not of a future free of danger, but of a future faced together. It was the end of a lifetime of loneliness for them both. They broke apart, but stayed close, his forehead resting against hers. For the first time, Robin didn't feel the need to analyze, to plan, to anticipate the next betrayal. She just felt. And what she felt was a profound, terrifying, and wonderful sense of peace. "Naruto," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm here," he whispered back. And she knew, with an unshakable certainty, that he always would be. They were two broken people, but together, they were whole. They were home, in the heart of Pangaea Castle. The air itself was a sterile, timeless void. A Mu floated before a holographic map of the world, a silent, black silhouette against the glowing blue projection. The five elders stood behind, their heads bowed, not daring to speak. Imu's attention was fixed on an anomaly in the new world. It was not an island, for no island was charted there. It was a blank spot on the map, but it was not empty. It was covered by a small, perfectly circular distortion, a smudge in the data of the world. It was a place that was actively hiding itself. A slender, inhumanly long finger rose, pointing at the anomaly. The elders felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. They had seen this gesture before. It was a gesture of deletion. An order for erasure. The order was given without a single word being spoken. The command traveled through unseen channels, relayed to the highest echelons of Cipher Pole. It was an order that superseded all other concerns, an order that came from the world's secret god. Activate the cleansing. On a hidden moon base, a relic of a forgotten age, an ancient weapon began to stir. Massive energy collectors, dormant for centuries, began to unfurl like black, metallic flowers. Turning their gaze toward the sun, a focusing lens the size of a city began to align, its target coordinates locking onto a tiny, insignificant blank spot on a map of the new world. On the island, Naruto and Robin slept peacefully in each other's arms, unaware that the heavens themselves were preparing to fall upon their small, perfect sanctuary. The age of gods had ended once before in a blaze of fire. And Amu was ready to end it again. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. The Golden Admiral and the Thunder God. The piece had a taste. It was the sweet, tangy flavor of the mango-like fruit they had for breakfast, the clean, crisp taste of fresh water from the mountain stream, and the faint, salty tang on Robin's lips when he kissed her. For Naruto, peace was a flavor, or he was only just learning to recognize, and he savored every moment. He lay on his back on the warm sand, his head in Robin's lap. She was gently running her fingers through his spiky blonde hair, a small, contented smile on her face as she read from a worn book. Above them, the sky was a perfect, cloudless blue, a stark contrast to the thick bank of fog that perpetually ringed their island sanctuary. He had created a pocket of impossible weather, a calm, sunny eye in a permanent, man-made hurricane. "Listen to this," she said softly, her voice a low murmur that blended with the sound of the waves. In the age before the dawn, the sky was not empty. The world was a canvas for the whims of those who sat on celestial thrones, their power absolute, their quarrels shaping the very mountains and seas. She paused, tracing the faded script with her finger. It's a banned text from a scholar in Ohara. He believed the world government didn't rise to power, but was installed, put in place, after a great war that erased all others. Others like them? Naruto asked, his eyes closed, enjoying the simple sensation of her touch. Perhaps, she mused, or others like you. He opened his eyes and looked up at her. The academic curiosity in her eyes was still there, but it was now softened by a deep, unwavering affection. She was no longer just studying his power, she was trying to understand. And the history of the world that had created a need for it. It was in that moment of perfect tranquility that the world went wrong. It wasn't a sound. It was a feeling. A sudden, jarring silence that fell over the island. The chittering of insects in the jungle ceased. The birdsong stopped. The very air, which had been warm and humid, suddenly felt thin, cold, and stretched taut, like the skin of a drum. Naruto sat up instantly, Robin's book falling unheeded onto the sand. "What is it?" Robin asked, her hand instinctively going to his arm. "The pressure," Naruto whispered, his eyes scanning the horizon. Something just broke the sky. The fog bank, his impenetrable wall of vapor and wind, began to dissipate. Not slowly, as if by a natural wind, but by being burned away from the outside in. A brilliant, golden light was slicing through it, and on the horizon, a dozen black shapes resolved themselves from the mist. Warships. 10 of them, their cannons bristling, their flags bearing the symbol of the world government. A buster call. Before the shock of the fleet's appearance could even register, a single, searing beam of yellow light shot from the lead ship. It crossed the miles between the fleet and the island in an instant, striking the beach not 100 yards from them. The light coalesced, solidifying into the form of a man. He was impossibly tall and slender, dressed in a sharp, yellow and white pinstriped suit. His hands were tucked casually in his pockets, and a lazy, almost bored expression was plastered on his face. Admiral Kizaru had arrived. "Ooh," the admiral drawled, his voice a long, mocking sound as he looked around at the idyllic island. "So this is the little love nest. Very rustic. You have terrible taste, Nico." Robin was on her feet, her bow a rigid line of defiance between Naruto and the admiral. The casual, almost flippant tone of the man did nothing to mask the terrifying power that radiated from him, a heatless energy that made the air itself seem to shimmer. Naruto stood up slowly, stepping in front of her. His expression was cold, the easy peace of moments before completely gone, replaced by the grim focus of a warrior. "You're an admiral," he stated. It wasn't a question. "Admiral Kizaru, at your service," he said with a mock bow. "And you must be the mysterious Raijin. I have to say, I'm a little disappointed. I was expecting someone grander. More thunder and lightning. You just look like a boy who's lost his way." He tilted his head, his lazy smile never faltering. "Sinking Eni's lobby was very, very naughty of you. The paperwork was a nightmare. You shouldn't have come here," Naruto said, his voice a low rumble. Golden sparks began to crackle around his fists. "I go where I'm told," Kizaru replied with a shrug. "It's the simple life. Orders are given, I follow them. Justice is served. Today's order is to retrieve the devil child and eliminate the anomaly that protects her. That's you, in case you were wondering. Her name is Robin," Naruto growled, the sparks growing into arcs of lightning. "And the only place she's going is with me." Kizaru's smile widened. "How passionate. Have you ever been kicked at the speed of light?" He didn't wait for an answer. He vanished. His body dissolved into a particle of light, shot forward, and reformed, his leg extended in a sweeping kick aimed at Naruto's head. The attack was absolute. There was no sound, no displaced air, just the instant arrival of a devastating blow. But it never landed. At the moment of impact, Naruto's body exploded into a maelstrom of golden lightning. Kizaru's light-based foot passed harmlessly through the crackling energy. Naruto reformed a dozen feet away, his expression unchanged. Kizaru lowered his leg, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing his face. "Ooh, a Logia, just like me. But different, slower, much noisier. I'm full of surprises," Naruto said. He stomped his foot, and the entire beach erupted. A wave of golden lightning, not from the sky but from the ground beneath them, shot toward the admiral. Kizaru, with his lazy grace, simply dissolved into light and reappeared high in the air above. "You can't hit what you can't catch," he mocked from above. He brought his hands together, and a blindingly bright ball of energy formed between them. Yasukani no Magatama. A torrential rain of light bullets shot down, each one an explosive projectile capable of punching a hole through a battleship's hull. They were not aimed at Naruto, but at Robin. Robin crossed her arms, a grim look on her face. Cien Fleur. Spider net. A massive net woven from 100 arms sprouted from the ground, ready to intercept the attack. But it wasn't needed. Naruto appeared in front of her, his hand outstretched. He didn't create a shield of lightning. He created a swirling vortex of wind and magnetic energy. The light bullets entered the field, and instead of exploding, they were bent, their trajectories warped, sending them careening harmlessly into the jungle and the sea. Kizaru whistled in appreciation. Bending light. Now that's a clever trick. The battle began in earnest. It was a terrifying spectacle, a clash of fundamental forces. Kizaru was speed. He was a phantom, a living laser, moving from one point to another in zero time, his attacks devastatingly precise. He would fire beams from his tips that leveled sections of the forest, or deliver kicks that sent shockwaves through the very bedrock of the island. Naruto was versatility. He was the storm. He couldn't match the Admiral's linear speed, so he didn't try. He became the entire battlefield. He filled the sky with black, roiling thunderclouds, plunging the sunny island into a dark twilight. Lightning rained down, not in random bolts, but in targeted, intelligent strikes that forced Kizaru to stay on the move. The sand on the beach swirled, superheated into glass by their clashing energies. From the deck of the lead warship, a vice admiral watched through a telescope, his face pale. They're destroying the island. Who is that man? How can he fight the admiral to a standstill? Robin was not idle. She was Naruto's anchor and his strategist. While Naruto kept Kizaru occupied, she focused on the fleet. Arms sprouted from the decks of the warships, twisting cannon barrels into knots, snapping rigging, and tossing ammunition overboard. The Marines, terrified of the woman who could attack them from their own ships, were thrown into chaos. She was a one-woman boarding party, disabling the buster call before it could even begin. Kizaru, seeing his support being dismantled, grew impatient. "You're becoming a real nuisance, Nico Robin," he called out, firing a laser toward her. Naruto was there in an instant, a wall of crackling thunder, absorbing the beam. But the distraction was what Kizaru wanted. The admiral appeared at Naruto's side, his foot glowing. "This time, you won't be so lucky." The kick connected. It struck Naruto square in the ribs. The force was incredible, and Naruto was sent flying, skipping across the water of the lagoon like a stone before crashing into the base of the mountain. "Naruto!" Robin cried out. Kizaru stood over her, his finger glowing, pointed at her head. "It's over." A low, guttural roar echoed from the mountain. It was not a sound of pain, but of rage. The sky turned from dark gray to a violent, churning black. The sea began to boil. Naruto walked out of the crater he'd made, a massive gash on his side steaming as raw energy cauterized the wound. His eyes were no longer blue. They were solid, glowing gold, and his body was wreathed in a furious aura of lightning that was no longer just a tool, but a part of him. "Get away from her," he snarled, and his voice was the sound of 1,000 thunderclaps at once. He vanished. He didn't become lightning, he moved as lightning. He crossed the lagoon in a microsecond, his fist cocked back. Kizaru, for the first time, looked genuinely alarmed, his eyes widening as he tried to dissolve. He wasn't fast enough. Naruto's fist, wrapped in the fury of a divine storm, slammed into Kizaru's chest. The impact didn't create an explosion. It created a sonic boom that shattered every piece of glass on the fleet and deafened the Marines. Kizaru was launched backward, a streak of yellow light shot from a cannon, shing through the main mast of his own flagship. The admiral pulled himself from the wreckage, his pinstripe suit smoldering, his sunglasses cracked. He was still in one piece, his Logia powers already repairing the damage. But he was no longer smiling. The lazy, mocking admiral was gone. In his place was a grim-faced warrior who had just been forcefully reminded of his own mortality. Naruto stood panting on the beach, the golden glow in his eyes receding. He looked at Kizaru. Kizaru looked back. They both knew. This was a stalemate. Kizaru was too fast and intangible to be truly defeated. Naruto was too powerful and versatile to be overcome. They could fight for days and the only result would be the complete annihilation of the island. Naruto looked at Robin. This wasn't a war he needed to win. It was a life he needed to protect. He made his choice. He gave her a look, a silent message that passed between them in an instant. "It's time to go." She nodded, her face set. Naruto turned his gaze to the sky. He raised both hands, not in aggression, but in supplication. He wasn't calling the storm. He was becoming it. He drew on every ounce of energy he had created, the churning thunderclouds, the static in the air, the heat from their battle. He began to glow, brighter and brighter, until he was a miniature sun on the war-torn beach, a being of pure, golden energy. Kizaru's eyes widened in alarm. What is he doing? Naruto didn't shout. He didn't scream. He simply released. An omnidirectional wave of pure electromagnetic energy erupted from him. It was not an explosion of force, but of information. A silent, invisible pulse that washed over everything. On the warships, every light, every dial, every den-den-mushi, went dead. Compasses spun wildly. Cannons, disabled by Robin and now electronically inert, slumped uselessly. The fleet was completely and utterly dead in the water, a collection of floating metal coffins. The pulse washed over Kizaru. As a man made of light, a form of electromagnetic energy, he was uniquely vulnerable. The chaotic wave disrupted his Logia form on a fundamental level. For a single, critical second, his powers flickered out. He was forced back into his physical body. Stunned and disoriented, his mind a jumble of static. In that single second of silence, Naruto grabbed Robin, wrapped his arms around her, and shot into the sky, a single, defiant bolt of lightning disappearing into the horizon. By the time Kizaru's head cleared and the Marines rebooted their emergency systems, they were gone. The island was a scarred, smoking ruin. The Buster Call was a failure. Kizaru stood on the deck of his crippled flagship, looking at the empty sky. He gingerly touched his chest, where the phantom pain of Naruto's blow still lingered. His lazy demeanor was completely absent, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. He picked up a backup, purely mechanical den-den-mushi. Fleet Admiral Sengoku, he said, his voice flat and serious. The mission is a failure. Nico Robin has escaped with the entity known as Raijin. There was a pause. Sengoku's angry shouting could be faintly heard even through the receiver. Kizaru cut him off. Listen to me. A Buster Call is not enough. An Admiral is not enough. He looked out at the devastation, at the silent, powerless fleet around him. We are not fighting a pirate with a strange devil fruit. We are fighting a rival force of nature. If you want to capture them, you will need to be ready to declare war on the sky itself. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Empty Throne's Decree. The landing was not a graceful arrival, it was a controlled crash. Naruto, his energy reserves utterly depleted, carried them as far as he could before his lightning form sputtered and died. They fell the last 100 feet into the deep, welcoming canopy of a dense jungle on an island far from the one Kizaru had turned into a battlefield. The thick, broad leaves cushioned their fall, and they came to rest in a heap on the mossy ground. The humid air thick with the scent of unknown blossoms and damp earth. Naruto lay on his back, gasping for air, his body feeling heavy and disconnected. The backlash from the electromagnetic pulse was profound. It wasn't a physical injury like a cut or a bruise, it was a deep, cellular exhaustion, as if every neuron in his body had been fired at once and was now refusing to answer. The golden aura that usually flickered at the edge of his vision was gone. For the first time since he had eaten the devil fruit, he felt entirely, frighteningly human. Robin was instantly at his side, her usual composure replaced by a pressing concern. She checked him for injuries, her hands gentle but efficient. Naruto, are you hurt? Just tired, he managed, his voice a hoarse whisper. I think I used too much. It feels like my bones are buzzing. She helped him to a sitting position against the trunk of a massive, gnarled tree. He was pale, a fine sheen of sweat on his brow, and she could see a faint tremor in his hands. Seeing him like this, so vulnerable after witnessing his godlike power, stirred a fierce protectiveness in her. He had been her shield. Now, it was her turn. For the next few days, their roles were reversed. Robin became the provider and protector. She explored their new surroundings, finding a cave behind a curtain of vines that would serve as a defensible shelter. Using her powers, she gathered fruit and fresh water, her sprouted limbs moving with a quiet efficiency through the jungle. She stood watch while he slept, a position she had held for herself her entire life, but which she now held for him without a second thought. During his recovery, they talked. The near-death experience had stripped away their last vestiges of reservation. He told her more about Konoha, about the loneliness of being a pariah, about the crushing weight of being expected to be a hero and a weapon at the same time. She, in turn, spoke of Ohara. She didn't just describe the burning buildings. She described the scent of old books in the tree of knowledge, the kind smile of Professor Clover, the feel of her mother's hand. She spoke of the faces of the friends she had made and lost over 20 years of running. Each betrayal a fresh scar on her soul. I always thought that if I could just find the Rio poneglyph, she confessed one evening, staring into the flickering flames of their campfire. I would finally understand why my home was destroyed. Why my life had to be this. It was a selfish reason. An obsession to justify my own pain. Naruto, now strong enough to sit up on his own, reached over and took her hand. It's not selfish to want to know why you're bleeding, he said softly. The selfish ones are the people who hold the knife and tell you it's for your own good. His simple, profound empathy was a constant source of wonder to her. He didn't offer pity, he offered understanding. As his strength returned, so did their sense of urgency. The encounter with Kizaru had changed everything. Hiding was no longer enough. The world government hadn't just sent an army, they had sent one of their pillars, a man who embodied one of the fundamental forces of their world. They wouldn't stop. They couldn't. They aren't just hunting us anymore, Robin said, her voice grim as she traced a map in the dirt floor of their cave. After Eni's lobby and now this, they are fighting us. We can't keep running from island to island, waiting for the next admiral to appear. So where do we go? Naruto asked. The golden energy was beginning to return to him, a kumfo. Our table warmth spreading through his veins. What's the plan? We stop running, she said, her eyes alight with a fierce resolve. We find the reason they are so desperate to silence us. I have a theory, a fragment I found in an Ohara text. It spoke of an island that serves as a key. A place that existed before the 20 kingdoms formed their great alliance. An island called Earth. Earth. With a V, she clarified. The text was incomplete, but it hinted that Earth was a place of knowledge, a library of the ancient world. If there are answers to be found, they will be there. Not just about the void century, but about the nature of the gods, the scholar wrote of. About you. The journey to Earth was long and perilous. Their bounties, once they were inevitably issued, were astronomical. Naruto's was a staggering 3 billion berries, a number that put him on par with the emperors of the sea. His poster was a grainy image captured from Eni's lobby, showing a golden, wrathful figure amidst a storm, with the simple, terrifying moniker, Raijin Naruto. Robin's bounty had quintupled, now clearly labeling her as his second in command. They were the world's most wanted, Orogu. God and the only one who could read his gospel. They acquired a new ship, a small, fast caravel they, liberated, from a pirate crew who had been foolish enough to try and claim their bounty. They saw, I led through treacherous waters and past hostile territories, relying on Naruto's ability to manipulate the weather to keep them hidden and Robin's intellect to navigate the complex political currents of the new world. Finally, they found it. Earth was not on any known map. They found it by following a star chart Robin had pieced together from her fragmented texts. It was an island that defied nature. The mountains were twisted into perfect spirals, and the trees, ancient and colossal, had bark that shimmered with an iridescent, metallic sheen. The entire island hummed with a low, resonant energy that made Naruto's teeth ache. It felt ancient, a place where the normal rules of the world had been written by a different author. At the island's heart, they found not a temple or a ruin, but a single, massive chamber carved from the living rock of the central mountain. And inside, resting on a simple stone dais, was a poneglyph. It was unlike any Robin had ever seen. It was not the indestructible black stone of the historical poneglyphs, nor the crimson of the road poneglyphs. It was carved from a solid, milky white crystal that seemed to glow with a faint inner light. The characters E.T.C.H.E.D. upon its surface were the familiar ancient script, but they seemed sharper, purer. Robin approached it with the reverence of a pilgrim reaching a sacred shrine. She placed her hand on its cool surface, closed her eyes, and began to read. Naruto stood guard, his senses on high alert, feeling the deep, thrumming energy of the island resonate with the power inside him. The silence in the chamber stretched for a long time, broken only by Robin's soft, rhythmic breathing. When she finally turned to him, her face was pale, and her eyes were wide with an expression he had never seen before, not fear, but a profound, earth-shattering awe. This, she began, her voice trembling slightly. This isn't a history, it's a creation myth. She began to translate, her voice growing stronger as she spoke, weaving a tale that rewrote the entire history of their world. Before the kingdoms, before the sea, before the world had a name, she recited, her eyes locked on his, there was the Great Will. It was a world of chaos, of vibrant, untamed life. This life was embodied by the kami, beings of immense power who were one with the elements they commanded. There was a kami of the forest, a kami of the sea, a kami of the sun, and a kami of the storm. Naruto felt a chill run down his spine. These beings were not rulers, Robin continued. They were the world itself, in all its wild, beautiful, and destructive glory. But another will emerged from the silence. A force that craved not chaos, but order. Not life, but stillness. The poneglyph calls it, Amu, the Great Cleanser. It was a force of absolute nullity, of silence. Its goal was to create a perfect, unchanging world. A world of one. She took a shaky breath, the implications of what she was reading crashing down on her. A war began. Not a war for territory, but a war for the very concept of existence. The kami fought to preserve the world's wildness. Amu fought to erase it, to cleanse the canvas. The Void Century was the final century of that war. She looked at Naruto, her eyes reflecting the glowing white poneglyph. Amu won. It defeated or erased the other kami. It took the chaotic, vibrant world and imposed a single, unyielding order upon it. And to maintain that order, it created the world government. It placed 20 kings on their thrones, wiped the memory of its own existence from history, and ascended to an empty throne in the shadows to rule over its silent, perfect world. The pieces clicked into place with terrifying clarity. The destruction of Ohara wasn't to hide the ancient weapons, it was to Silenk. The last people who could read the story of the government's true creator. The 5 elders weren't the world's rulers, they were high priests. And the empty throne was not empty at all. So, this power, Naruto said, looking at his own hands, at the golden sparks that now crackled at his fingertips. The kami no mi, it's not just a fruit. It's an echo. Robin finished, her voice a whisper. The last remnant of the storm god. Raijin, a seed of the old world's chaotic will, left behind in the hope that one day it might bloom again. Your existence, Naruto, is not just a crime against the world government. It's blasphemy against their god. You are the return of the very thing Amu spent 800 years trying to erase. Their personal quest for freedom had just become a war for the soul of the world. They were no longer just a runaway archaeologist and her powerful protector. They were the last echo of a forgotten history and the resurgence of a defeated god, standing against the silent, absolute ruler of the world. The chamber of the 5 elders was colder than usual. They did not sit on their platforms. They knelt. They knelt before the empty throne, upon which sat the tall, slender, shadowed figure of Amu. A report lay on the floor before them, a detailed account of Kizaru's failed mission, complete with a hastily sketched image of Naruto wreathed in a divine aura of lightning. The echo grows louder, the blonde elder said, his voice a low, fearful murmur. It has allied itself with the voice of the past, the swordsman elder added. The storm and the history. A dangerous combination. Amu did not speak. It simply raised a single, slender hand and made a gesture in the air. A gesture of finality. A gesture of erasure. The 5 elders understood. The time for conventional warfare, for admirals and buster calls, was over. This was a threat to the fundamental order of their world. It required a proportional response. Activate the great cleansing, the mustached elder commanded. His voice trembling but firm. Relay the order. Target the entire quadrant of the new world where the usurper was last seen. But sir, another elder protested weakly, the call. Lateral damage. Millions of innocent lives. The silent garden must be pruned of its weeds, the blonde elder said, his voice cold as ice as he recited the doctrine of their god. Lest they choke out the flowers. In the highest chamber of Pangaea Castle, Amu looked at the golden flame that represented Naruto's life. It was no longer just flickering. It was burning like a star. Amu extended a finger, not toward a map, but toward a model of the sky. A silent command was given. And from the shadows of the moon, an ancient and terrible eye began to open, its gaze falling upon the world below. The hunt was over. The cleansing had begun. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Divine Conclave. The air on Earth had hummed with a forgotten power. The air of the open sea felt dead in comparison. As they led away from the island of spiraling mountains, a profound and heavy silence settled between them, the weight of 800 years of hidden history pressing down on their small ship. Naruto stood at the prow, his hand resting on the wooden rail, staring at the horizon. He wasn't looking at the waves, he was feeling the world. The connection he had to the atmosphere, to the very energy of the planet, felt strained. Tainted. It was like listening to a beautiful song with a single, discordant note growing louder and louder, threatening to drown out the melody. "Something's wrong," he said, his voice low. "It's not the weather. It's the sky itself. It feels thin, stretched." Robin came to stand beside him, wrapping an arm around his. She leaned her head against his shoulder, finding comfort in his solid presence even as she shared his unease. The poneglyph said Imu's power was one of nullity, of silence. "Perhaps what you're feeling is its gaze." The thought was chilling, to be watched by a being that could erase history. Before they could ponder it further, a flash of light on the horizon stole their attention. It was leagues away, a brief, impossibly bright pinprick against the blue canvas of the sky. It was not lightning. It was too clean, too focused. A second later, the sound reached them, a low, guttural thrum that was felt more in the bones than heard with the ears, followed by an unnatural, all-encompassing silence. The very air had been stolen. Naruto's eyes widened, his unique senses giving him a horrifying insight into what had just happened. "It's gone," he whispered, his voice choked with disbelief. "What's gone?" Robin asked, her heart beginning to pound. "Everything," he said, pointing a trembling finger toward the horizon. "There was an island there. A small one. I could feel it, the life on it, the wind rustling its trees, the people breathing, and now there's just nothing. A hole in the world." They had just witnessed the great cleansing. Not as a target, but as a bystander. It was a demonstration of power so absolute and so casual it bordered on obscene. Amu hadn't been aiming for them. It had been pruning its garden, erasing a random island, full of innocent people simply to send a message, or perhaps for no reason at all. The sheer, monstrous indifference of the act was more terrifying than any declaration of war. Robin felt a cold dread wash over her. The memory of Ohara's flames sharp and sudden. This was the power that had destroyed her home. A power that could point at a map and say, "This no longer exists." Naruto's hands clenched into fists, the wooden rail groaning under the pressure. The buzzing in his bones returned, not from exhaustion, but from a rage so pure it was like a physical force. This was it, the ultimate expression of the philosophy he had fought his entire life, the powerful treating the powerless as things to be discarded. "We can't just run," he said, his voice a low growl of thunder. "We can't hide in an island and wait for that light to find us. We have to fight." "But how?" Robin asked, her mind racing, trying to formulate a strategy against an enemy that could erase reality from orbit. "Naruto, that thing, it's not a weapon. It's a judgment. Then we judge it back," he declared, turning to face her, his eyes blazing with a golden, righteous fire. "It hides in the shadows on a throne of lies. We'll drag it into the light. But we can't do it alone." They spent the rest of the day in their ship's small cabin, a map spread between them. It was Robin's turn to lead. Her mind, a repository of the world's hidden connections and political fault lines, was now their greatest weapon. "We need allies," she stated, her finger tracing lines across the new world. "Not just strong ones. We need people who have already seen the hypocrisy of the world government. People who have a reason to fight for a world without a thumb pressing down on them from the heavens." Her finger stopped on a large, unclaimed territory in the new world. "We start here, with the remnants of the Whitebeard pirates." Their journey took them to Sphinx, the homeland of Whitebeard, an island protected from the government not by force, but by the love its people held for their former protector. They found Marco the Phoenix guarding his father's grave. The former 1st Division commander looked tired, the years sin Ce the paramount wore having etched lines of grief around his eyes, but the fire within him had not been extinguished. He was wary of their arrival, his blue flames flickering to life as Naruto and Robin approached the simple grave marker. "We're not here to fight," Naruto said, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "That's what everyone says," Marco replied, his voice laced with suspicion. "Your face is on every paper, Raijin. Bounty of 3 billion. They say you sank Eni's lobby. What do you want with a graveyard?" "We want to offer you what the world government took," Robin said, her voice clear and steady. "A chance at vengeance. And a future." Over the next hour, they told him everything. They told him of Amu, of the empty throne, and of the power that had just erased an island from existence. They didn't ask him to join a crew or bend a knee. They laid the truth before him as an equal. Marco listened, his expression shifting from skepticism to shock, and finally, to a grim understanding. He had fought at Marineford for his family. He had seen the lengths the government would go to in order to preserve its power. The idea of a secret king, a shadow god, did not seem so impossible. "You're talking about a war against the world itself, Yoi," he said, the weight of the words heavy in the air. "The world is already at war," Naruto countered, his gaze unwavering. "It just doesn't know it yet. That light in the sky will keep falling until it has cleansed everything that doesn't fit its perfect, silent order. Your father fought for the freedom of his family. We're fighting for the freedom of everyone." Naruto held out his hand. Golden lightning crackled gently around his palm. "I'm not Whitebeard. I'm not trying to build an empire. I'm just a storm that's about to break. I'm offering you the chance to be a part of it." Marco looked from Naruto's powerful, honest face to Robin's intelligent, determined one. He saw the truth in their eyes. He looked at Whitebeard's grave, at the resting place of the man who had adopted him, and at Ace's. This wasn't just about vengeance anymore. It was about honoring their legacy. It was about building a world they would have been proud of. "My brothers are scattered," Marco said, his flames finally receding. "But they will listen. I will send word. If you're going to challenge the heavens, the sons of Whitebeard will be there to see you do it." Their next stop was Wano. The recently liberated nation was a hive of activity, its people still rebuilding after decades of tyranny. Getting an audience with the new shogun, Kazuki Momonosuke, was a challenge. They were outsiders, powerful ones, and the samurai were fiercely protective of their newfound peace. It was Robin who opened the door. When word reached the shogun's council that the last survivor of Ohara, a woman who could read the language of their ancestors, stood at their shores, they could not refuse her. They were granted an audience in the shogun's castle. Momonosuke sat on his dais, flanked by the red scabbards, his youthful face set in a serious expression. In the corner, the pirate hunter Roronoa Zoro watched them, his hand never straying from the hilt of his swords. Robin spoke first, explaining their purpose not as conquerors, but as historians seeking an alliance. She spoke of the Kazuki clan's ancient pact with the people of Ohara, of their shared duty to the poneglyphs. She told them of the true nature of their enemy, the force that had kept Wano's borders closed for 800 years. When she finished, Naruto stepped forward. "I know you've just finished one war. I know I have no right to ask you to fight another. But the enemy that oppressed you is just a puppet. The real master is still pulling the strings. As long as the empty throne is occupied, Wano will never be truly free." "Big words," Zoro grunted, taking a step forward. "Power isn't in words, it's in the will behind them." His aura flared, a palpable wave of conqueror's haki washing over the room. It was an immense pressure, a king's will made manifest. Naruto didn't flinch. He didn't answer with his own haki. He simply let a fraction of his own presence fill the room. It wasn't a wave of pressure. It was a change in the environment. The air grew thick with the smell of ozone. The light from the paper lanterns flickered as the static in the room built to an impossible level. Tiny, harmless sparks of golden lightning danced in the air. He wasn't trying to dominate them. He was showing them that he was the atmosphere. He was the storm. Zoro's eyes widened, his hand tightening on his sword. He recognized it for what it was. Not the will of a king, but the presence of a deity. Momonosuke stood up, his small frame filled with the dignity of his lineage. "My father, Kazuki Oden, died to open Wano's borders and reveal the truth of the world. To turn our backs on that truth now would be to dishonor his sacrifice. He looked at Naruto, a new respect in his eyes. The samurai of Wano will fight. For my father. And for the dawn of a new world. Their final meeting was the most audacious. Using Marco's connections, they arranged a parley with red-haired Shanks. They met on a storm-lashed island in a neutral territory, the sky a churning gray. Shanks was exactly as the stories described. Relaxed, charismatic, with an easy smile and eyes that missed nothing. But beneath the calm exterior, Naruto felt a power that was utterly different from his own. Where Naruto's was a raging, elemental force, Shanks's was a deep, quiet ocean of spiritual energy, Aki so refined it had become a law of nature unto itself. They stood opposite each other, their respective crews watching from a distance. So, you're the one giving the government such a headache, Shanks said, his smile genuine. I have to admit, I'm impressed. We've come to ask for your help, Naruto said directly. Shanks's smile didn't falter. I don't take sides. I keep the balance. There is no balance, Robin interjected. Her voice sharp. There is only a scale weighted so heavily on one side that the other can't even be seen. We've seen the truth of the world, Shanks. We know who sits on the empty throne. The smile finally vanished from Shanks's face. He looked at Robin, then at Naruto, and he saw they were not lying. The playful emperor was gone, replaced by a man who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. So, it's finally come, he said, his voice a low whisper. He looked out at the raging sea. My old captain found the truth. He laughed, but he knew the world wasn't ready. He was waiting for someone. He turned his gaze back to Naruto. Perhaps he was waiting for you. He shook his head. I cannot join your war. Not yet. My role is a different one. But a world ruled by a silent god is not a world any of us can live in. He took a step forward. When you strike, you must strike the head. Mary Geoise is not just a city, it's a fortress, defended by more than just the Marines. It is defended by a secret that predates the throne itself. Seek the shadow of the red line. You'll understand when you see it. He wouldn't join them, but he had given them a vital clue. It was enough. The Divine Conclave, as it would later be called, took place on the back of Zunesha, the giant walking elephant, a moving island that could not be tracked. The remnants of the Whitebeard pirates, the leaders of the Wano samurai, and the Mink tribe all gathered. It was a strange, powerful alliance born of desperation and hope. Naruto stood before them, with Robin at his side. He was not on a stage. He stood among them, as one of them. I am not a king, he began, his voice ringing with power and clarity. I am not a shogun or an emperor. I am the son of a people who were forgotten, and the inheritor of a power that was sealed away. I look at you all, and I see the same. Minks, hunted for your loyalty. Samurai, enslaved in your own home. Pirates, who lost your father to a lie. We have all been victims of a world that fears anything it cannot control. He looked up at the sky. Up there, a being that calls itself a god is preparing to wash the world clean. It thinks of us as weeds. It will burn our homes, silence our children, and erase our histories, all for the sake of its perfect, quiet garden. A golden aura began to flare around him, the power of Raijin responding to his will. I say, let's give it a storm it will never forget. We will not go to Mary Geoise to ask for our freedom. We will go there to take it. We will climb the red line, we will tear down their holy city. And we will show their silent god the true meaning of thunder. A roar went up from the assembled crowd. It was a roar of pirates and samurai, of minks and men. It was the roar of a world that was tired of being quiet. It was the sound of the coming storm. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Cleansing Fire. The world held its breath. On the seas of the New World, strange phenomena were being reported. The currents grew sluggish, the winds died, and an unsettling, oppressive silence began to fall, muffling even the crash of the waves. It was as if the planet itself was bracing for a blow. From his perch on Zunesha's back, Naruto felt it most keenly. The sky, his domain, felt wrong. The energy in the upper atmosphere was being drawn away, pulled toward a single, invisible point high in the heavens, leaving a terrifying void in its wake. It's coming, he said, his voice grim. He and Robin stood with their new allies on the massive creature's head, a war council gathered under an unnaturally calm sky. Marco, Momonosuke, and the mink leaders, Carrot and Wanda, all looked to him. In the span of a few weeks, he had gone from a myth to the de facto leader of a rebellion against a foe they were only just beginning to comprehend. We still don't know what it is, Marco said, his arms crossed. A weapon, a devil fruit power. How do we fight something we can't see, Yoi? Robin unfurled an ancient star chart she had been studying, a relic from the Kazuki library. Shanks said to seek the shadow of the red line. This chart shows an anomaly. A shadow that falls on the world when there should be none. It's not celestial. It's artificial. Something is parked in the sky, between the world and the moon. As if on cue, a lookout screamed. He was pointing not at the horizon, but straight up. Every eye followed his finger. A new star had appeared in the daytime sky. It was a tiny pinprick of white light, but it was growing, brightening with an unnatural speed. It was not a star. It was a lens, an eye. The ancient weapon, hidden for 800 years, was now visible to the naked eye, a malevolent god opening its gaze upon the world below. That's it, Naruto breathed. A cold knot of dread and fury tightening in his gut. That's the source of the silence. It's drinking the sky. The light intensified, no longer a pinprick but a searing white sun. It was aimed not at Zunesha, but at the sea itself, at the entire quadrant of the ocean where their alliance had gathered. Amu wasn't targeting a single island. It was targeting a concept. It was wiping a square from the map. We have to move, Momonosuke yelled, his voice cracking with urgency. Zunesha, run. The colossal elephant let out a mournful cry and began to lumber, its massive legs churning the sea. But it was like an ant fleeing a tidal wave. They were too slow. They were all too slow. There's nowhere to run, Marco said, his face pale as he looked up at the descending judgment. Blue flames began to lick at his arms. We can only try to endure. The samurai drew their swords. The minks bristled, their fur standing on end as they prepared to meet their doom with defiance. But Naruto just stood there, his head tilted back, his eyes locked on the terrifying light. He wasn't watching it with fear. He was watching it with the critical eye of a rival. Robin, he said, his voice calm amidst the rising panic. Get them ready. When that beam hits, the sea is going to turn to steam. The shockwave will be unlike anything they've ever seen. Have the minks use their electro. Tell Marco to shield as many as he can with his flames. Get everyone to the lowest point on Zunesha's back. She looked at him, her heart in her throat. What are you going to do? He turned to her and gave her a smile. It was a fierce, confident, and slightly reckless smile, the one she had first seen on the makeshift raft in Water 7. The poneglyph said Imu's power is silence and nullity. It erases. It brings stillness. He clenched his fists, and golden lightning began to wrap around his arms. My power is noise. It's chaos. It's the storm that refuses to be quiet. Let's see which one is stronger. He kissed her, a hard, quick kiss that was both a promise and a farewell. I'll be back. And then he ascended. He didn't fly. He became a pillar of gold and blue, a vertical lightning strike in reverse, shish. Ooting up from Zunesha's back into the heavens. The allies watched in stunned silence as he climbed, a single, defiant speck of life rising to meet the descending fist of a silent god. As he rose, he drew on everything around him. The moisture in the air, the kinetic energy of the wind, the latent static of the entire planet. The sky, which had been unnaturally calm, responded to his call. Black clouds, thick and heavy with power, began to swirl around him, drawn from hundreds of miles in every direction. He was not just a man anymore. He was the heart of a planetary immune response, a storm gathering to fight a cosmic infection. High in the stratosphere, in the thin, cold air where the world met the void, he stopped. Below him, the world was a beautiful, curved canvas of blue and white. Above him, the cleansing beam was no longer a point of light. It was a column of pure, white-hot energy, miles wide, descending with the terrible, inexorable silence of the void. For the first time, Naruto felt a flicker of true, mortal fear. The scale of it was beyond comprehension. This was not the fire of a jutsu or the light of a devil fruit. This was the harnessed power of a star. But then he thought of Robin's face, of Marco's weary hope, of the samurai's defiant courage. He thought of the nameless, faceless people on the island that had been erased. His fear was burned away by a white-hot rage. "You want silence," he roared, his voice a thunderclap that shook the heavens. "Then listen to this." He brought his hands together, and the storm he had gathered answered. The black clouds converged, forming a swirling, churning vortex of unimaginable scale. It was a hurricane in the heavens, a shield of wind and lightning. The cleansing beam struck. The moment of impact was silent, for there was no air to carry the sound. But the visual was apocalyptic. A wave of pure white light washed over the vortex. Naruto's storm, a force that could have torn continents apart, buckled and strained under the sheer, relentless pressure of the beam. Naruto was at the center of it, a living conduit. The energy of the beam, pure and absolute, crashed against the chaotic, untamed energy of the storm. It was a battle of philosophies made manifest. Order versus chaos, stillness versus life. He felt the power of Raijin, the echo of the ancient god, roaring within him. It was not just his power anymore. It was the will of the world fighting back, a legacy of defiance passed down through a single, strange fruit. He poured all of it, all of himself, into the storm. "Raaaaaaaaaah!" he screamed, his body becoming a star of golden lightning, pushing back against the white. For a moment, there was a stalemate. The white beam and the golden storm held each other in a terrifying, beautiful equilibrium high above the world. But Naruto knew he couldn't just block it. The energy had to go somewhere. With a final, desperate surge of will, he did something that should have been impossible. He didn't just push back. He bent it. Like a lens of wind and magnetism, he warped the trajectory of the cleansing beam. The colossal column of white energy, aimed at the sea, was deflected, shunted sideways at a sharp angle. The beam, now traveling parallel to the planet's surface, slammed into the one thing in the world big enough to take the hit, the red line. The impact was cataclysmic. A section of the indestructible continent, miles long and thousands of feet high, simply ceased to exist. It didn't explode. It was erased, vaporized by a power it had never been meant to withstand. The holy land of Mary Geoise, perched atop that very section, was suddenly on the edge of a newly formed cliff, chunks of its foundation crumbling into the sea below. The beam cut out. Amu, from its throne, had seen enough. The backlash hit Naruto like a physical blow. The energy he had channeled, on a scale his body was never meant to contain, ravaged him. He felt a searing pain, as if his very soul was on fire. His lightning form flickered, sputtered, and died. He began to fall. He was a broken doll, tumbling through the stratosphere, his golden aura gone, his consciousness fading. He saw the world spinning below him. He saw the faces of his friends, of his village, of his parents. He saw Robin's face, her tear-filled eyes, her smile. So this is it, he thought, a strange sense of peace settling over him. I saved them. That's enough. He closed his eyes, ready for the end. He did not hit the water. He was caught. Something warm, soft, and impossibly gentle wrapped around him. He felt a wave of soothing, life-giving energy wash over his charred, exhausted body. It was a flame that did not burn, but healed. He cracked his eyes open to see the concerned, pineapple-shaped head of Marco the Phoenix, in his full, brilliant blue zone form. The former Whitebeard commander had flown higher than any bird should be able to, a desperate, suicidal climb to catch the falling god. Gotcha, yoi, Marco grunted. The strain of flying at this altitude and carrying Naruto's dead weight evident in his voice. Don't go dying on us now. You just broke their favorite toy. The real fight is about to start. Naruto managed a weak, bloody grin. Good, he whispered, before finally succumbing to the darkness. I was getting bored. Down below, the world had changed. The sea, superheated by the proximity of the beam, was a churning mass of steam and monstrous waves. But the allies had survived, shielded by Zunesh's immense bulk and their own desperate defenses. But more importantly, the world had seen. On every island with a view of the sky, people had witnessed the new star, the descending beam, and the golden storm that had risen to meet it. They had seen the red line, the symbol of the world's unshakable authority, shattered. The lie was broken. The silent god had been forced to show its hand. And the world had seen that a storm had risen to meet it. The age of fear was ending. The age of thunder was about to begin. Chapter 9 End.